You showing up is just an embarrassment to the whole family. That's what my father said when I asked, "Are we inviting the relatives to Mom's birthday this year?" Like we usually do. They feared my presence would make them look bad in front of my sister's boyfriend. After that I said nothing. I quietly logged into my bank account and canceled every automatic payment I had covered for the past 2 years. 1 month later they realized how important I was, but it was already too late. I didn't accept a single apology. I chose to live. I am 30 years old and I live in a small town that is approximately 40 minutes away from Seattle. Every morning, I make myself a cup of coffee, turn on the weather report, and head to the office, which is less than 10 meters away from my house. I co-founded a small technology company that specializes in the field of renewable energy. Despite the fact that not everyone understands what I do, including my family, they still believe that I spend my days tightening screws and fixing machines. However, I don't mind because I've never felt the need to explain. Sometimes when someone asks me about it. When someone asks me about my family, whether it be my parents or my sister Melissa, I smile a little bit and say, "It's been a while since we talked." I say this not because I'm trying to hide anything, but because I don't see the point in retelling it anymore. I haven't been in contact with them for more than 2 years. There have been no calls, no texts, no holidays, no birthdays, nothing. It's been a long and quiet stretch, as if the line between us was severed, and no one bothered to bring us back together. I used to believe that family was everything, but then, on my mother's birthday, everything changed. When I called my mother right away, my father picked up after just 2 rings and said, "I'll be coming home 2 days early." I said in a casual manner, "If there's anything you need me to pick up or help with, just let me know." At first, he just gave a vague response, but then he hesitated, and when he finally spoke, his voice sounded like he was hesitating. I had just booked my flight and gotten time off work 3 weeks prior to my mother's birthday. The plan was simple. I would go home early, stay a few days, and assist with preparations, just like I do every other year. I just wanted to give them a heads up. Off heavier than usual, like he was trying to avoid something. "Nolan, if possible, maybe don't come home this year." At that moment I thought he was just concerned about my schedule. "It's fine, Dad," I said, still holding a warm mug of coffee. "I've got everything sorted. It's no trouble." There was a longer pause this time, then he spoke again, firmer now, but also colder. "Melissa's bringing her boyfriend home this year. He's a manager, someone important, speaks well, and carries himself properly, and your job well. It isn't very comfortable just to talk about, so it's best if you don't come." At that moment, I felt a heat rise from the back of my neck to my face. My heartbeat skipped, and I instinctively gripped my coffee mug tighter. "What the hell did you just say?" I snapped, no longer able to keep my voice calm. "Are you seriously saying that to me right now?" He didn't deny it, didn't take it back, didn't soften. Instead he said plain and sharp, "You coming home would just embarrass the whole family. If you insist on coming, don't call me your father." And then, without a moment's pause, he hung up. I set the phone down. My hand was still trembling, slightly damp with sweat. The apartment around me was utterly silent. No TV, no footsteps, just me standing there staring into the space before me, as if I'd just been yanked out of my life. His words kept echoing in my head, slow and clear like a recording stuck on a loop. "You coming home would just embarrass the whole family. If you still insist on coming back, then don't call me your father." For a moment I wondered if I had misheard him, but no, every word and tone was cold as ice and solid as stone. There was no slip of the tongue, no room left for hope. I clenched my jaw, my throat tightening like something had lodged there and refused to go down. Right then memories started flooding back. I quietly paid all the bills for them, electricity, water, internet, more than 2 years of it. No one ever mentioned it, and now they called me the shame of the family. Right after that, I picked up my phone, my hand still slightly shaking, though my mind had started to go cold. I opened the banking app and scrolled down to the transaction history, my only goal. I needed to see how much money I had spent on my family over the past 2 years. I needed a number, an electric bill, a water bill, and internet service every single month. Not a single payment was missed, and each payment was processed on time and automatically pulled from my account. I scrolled slowly down to the very bottom. I stared at that number for a few more seconds. It wasn't because I was surprised. Rather, it was because something inside my chest had suddenly settled. It wasn't sadness or anger. Rather, it was emptiness. Nearly $10,000 was spent on my family. Now, they call me the shame of the family. As I looked at the long list of bank transactions, a question quietly surfaced. It was a question that no one in my family had ever asked before. In 30 years, no one in my family had ever asked Melissa to do as much for our parents as I have. It wasn't jealousy. Measured against, I had paid nearly $10,000 in living expenses for them silently, without asking for anything in return, without ever bringing it up. And her, has she ever had to sacrifice anything, ever asked if they needed help, or did she show up, smile pretty, and leave an impression in a lovely dress with a successful boyfriend in her arms? I wasn't asking to keep score, I was asking because for the first time I realized something in this family fairness was never part of the equation I'd gotten used to. Standing on the sidelines since I was a kid in family photos, I was usually the one partly hidden behind someone else or caught at the edge of the frame. I was not quite looking at the camera, no one ever told me to step aside, but somehow I always did. Every critical moment in our family revolved around Melissa, from birthday parties and graduations to her breakups. There was always a reason for everyone to rally around, comfort and praise her. As for me, I can't even remember the last time someone asked if I was okay. Melissa is 2 years older than me, but I used to believe that if I worked hard enough, if I stayed out of trouble, and if I quietly took care of everything, then maybe one day they would finally see me. But it turned out that when you're used to being invisible, no one notices when you're gone. In those same conversations, if I came up at all, it was a quick footnote. Nolan, he's fine, he does something with technology. I used to believe that if I worked hard enough, if I stayed out of trouble, and if I quietly took care of everything, then maybe one day they would finally see me. However, when I started covering my eyes, I began to believe that. Parents' utility bills, electricity, water, internet. Nearly 2 years ago, it all began with a phone call from my mom. That day, she complained about how the cost of living had gone up, how this month's bills had spiked unexpectedly, and how the retirement income wasn't cutting it anymore. Then gently, with a hesitant tone, she said, "If you could help us a little, it would mean a lot." I agreed. At the time, I thought it would just be for a few months until things settled down, but the months that followed looked exactly like that first one. No one ever. When I brought up the possibility of ending it, no plan B was ever suggested, and I would then question, "Is Melissa helping out in any way, Mom?" She would always avoid answering the question, and sometimes she would say something like, "Just help us this month, your sister will pitch in next time." Other times, she would say something like, "Your sister is covering Dad's medical stuff, that's not easy either." I had heard those lines so many times that I could recite them by heart, and I would just smile and let it go every time because I knew deep down that none of it was true. As a result, I continued to send the money, which was nearly $400 per month, in a quiet and consistent manner, without complaint. No one mentioned it. It's not that I didn't care, it's that I thought it was the right thing to do. I used to think that if I was quiet enough and responsible enough, maybe they'd notice. However, today, after everything that had happened, they look at me and call me the shame of the family. After a while, when everything around me had settled into silence, I just sat there frozen on the couch with my phone still in my hand. I wasn't angry anymore, and I wasn't even heartbroken. There was just this one unmistakable feeling that settled in my chest, and it was something like, "That's enough." Right after that, I opened my banking app and scrolled down to the section where I had set up monthly transfers to cover my parents' bills, to cover electricity, water, and internet. I tapped into each item and canceled it without any hesitation. I did it quietly, not to get even, but to hold on to the one thing I still had left, a little self-respect, which was the only thing they hadn't managed to take away from me. About a week later, I received the first message from my mother, which was written in the same soft tone that she always used. She made no mention of what had happened, and she did not mention what had happened. "Apologies, I just received a notification that the internet bill is due." I read the message, stared at the screen for a moment, and then put the phone down without responding. This was not because I was trying to make a statement. Rather, it was because after everything, the first thing they thought to say was still a request to pay the internet bill note. I was okay. I didn't even say something as simple as whether or not we could talk. I remained silent, and I believe that silence conveyed everything that needed to be communicated. 2 weeks later, my father called the phone, rang a few times, and then stopped. "The power company called. This month's bill hasn't been paid. What's going on?" Still no concern, still no acknowledgement of what he said the day I called to say I'd be coming home for Mom's birthday. I listened to the message, turned off the screen, and laid the phone face down on the table, and just like that, I remained silent through to my mother's birthday, about 3 weeks after the day my father told me not to come home. I didn't answer the phone a few minutes after that. His tone was sharp and impatient, just as it had always been. His tone was sharp and impatient, just as it had always been. At home, it was my mother's birthday. The party went on as it does every year, with her favorite roasted chicken, the usual cake from the bakery she likes, and a few close relatives gathered around the dinner table. Everything was neatly planned and in place, with the exception of me. That afternoon, at precisely 4 o'clock, I was sitting in my living room holding a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. My phone buzzed, and it was my mother calling. I looked at her name on the screen for a few seconds before putting the phone down. They didn't answer, and I didn't even think twice about it. I stayed where I was, leaning gently against the back of the chair. My eyes were resting on the fogged-up window. The sky outside was a dull gray, no rain, but cold in that quiet, creeping way that feels like winter just brushed up against your doorstep. About 10 minutes later, the messages started coming in. Mom was first. Nolan, the power has been shut off. The whole house is dark. Please pay the bill. I let them all go without any curiosity or urge to respond. I let them all go. 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 I had no curiosity or urge to respond. I stayed right where I was. I picked up the phone and read her message in silence. There was no anger or surprise, just a quiet hollowness spreading through my chest. It was the kind of hollowness you get when you've spent years caring for a family and now you're the only one left carrying that weight. Then, my father had no water, we couldn't cook, and we couldn't handle it. Melissa's internet was down, and guests were arriving. Please fix this urgently. I glanced at the clock at 5:12 p.m. I recalled clearly that I had canceled all of the automatic payments exactly 3 weeks ago, right after the night that my father told me that if I insisted on coming home, I should never call him Dad again. Now, in the middle of the birthday party, they told me not to attend. Everything started shutting down, including the power, the water, and the internet. They disappeared right when they needed it the most. I didn't text back, and I didn't call them. My phone started buzzing again non-stop around 6 o'clock in the evening, and this time it wasn't my parents or Melissa anymore. It was the relatives, the ones who only show up on holidays but somehow feel entitled to pass judgment. The messages came in waves. Some of them called me disrespectful, and one of them said outright, "You embarrassed your mother in front of the whole family." Another message was more subtle, but it was clear that they were angry with me. I could see that they were not calling because they missed me. Rather, they were calling because there was no one left to carry the burden for them. Just as cutting, "Your sister was right. People like you shouldn't show up on a happy day." I read through each message, not bothering to reply, not because silence meant agreement, but because I'd long stopped trying to explain myself to people who always chose the louder crowd over what was right. I was about to set the phone down when the screen lit up again. It was Aunt Lauren, the only person in the family who still held a bit of trust in me. She was calling on video through an old app only she and I still used because we were the only ones who ever cared enough to look each other in the eye when it mattered. I hesitated for a moment, then answered on the second ring. The first thing that came into view was her face, slightly blurred by the yellow glow from the kitchen behind her, a place I used to know like the back of my hand, every crack on the wall, every squeaky cabinet. But tonight the room felt different. There were clinks of silverware, awkward laughter, and scattered small talk floating in the background. She looked at me through the screen, her eyes soft but worried. "You're not going to pay it, Nolan?" Her voice wasn't accusatory, just light, like she was trying to figure out what was happening. I looked into her eyes, and when I finally spoke my voice was slow, like I was dragging up something I had buried for too long. "You know, Auntie, it was Dad told me not to come." I swallowed hard. "He said if I still insisted on showing up, I shouldn't call him my father anymore." She went quiet, her gaze shifted as if she were scanning the room behind her, and right then the call descended into chaos. I heard my mother's voice, more evident now, cutting through the noise. "Tell him I'm ashamed of him on this day of all days. How could he do this?" Then my father, sharp and loud, "It's not that serious. It's just paying a few bills. What kind of man gets petty over money?" Another voice, "I think it was my uncle. Poor Melissa having to deal with a brother like that." Footsteps approached the camera. Melissa appeared behind Aunt Lauren, arms crossed, lips curled in irritation. "He even picked up the call. Mom's been crying all day. Does he even care? Seriously, no shame at all." I didn't say a word. I just watched and held on to my silence, as if it were the only form of self-protection I had left. Just as I was about to end the call, another face appeared from the left side of the screen, a young man with neatly combed hair and a dark suit. He looked at me, a flicker of confusion in his eyes, then offered a hesitant smile. "Hey, boss," he said, voice slightly rough, like he wasn't sure if those words belonged in this moment. I froze, my eyes stayed locked on the screen, and I gripped the phone a little tighter without even realizing it. I hadn't expected this, not here, not on the very night they all agreed I was too much of a shame to be invited. I stared at him for a few seconds longer, and then it all clicked. His face, the way he spoke. Of course, he was one of the new hires recently transferred from our southern branch. We'd exchanged a few emails, he'd sent me 2 reports, but I had never realized he was Melissa's boyfriend, the one everyone had been so eager to impress. The room behind Aunt Lauren seemed to hold its breath. I saw her glance over her shoulder, and suddenly an anxious stir caused the kitchen to come to life. And then someone inquired in a quiet voice, "Wait, what did he just call Nolan?" With a voice that was unsure, another voice followed, asking, "Boss, does that indicate that Nolan is Melissa's boyfriend's boss?" At that moment, the young man stood up straighter, looked past the camera toward the other people in the room, and spoke clearly. "In case you didn't know, I work at Pacific Terrytech." The whispers grew into a rising wave that overlapped with uncertainty, and I just kept watching the screen without nodding or denying it. "I'm just waiting to see where it will go." Mr. Nolan is one of the company's co-founders. His words landed sharp and unmistakable, loud enough to cut through the clatter of plates and murmurs, and the room fell into a strange kind of silence. It's not awkward, just stunned. I still didn't say a word. I pressed my lips together and gave a faint nod, a quiet confirmation. He turned back to the screen, eyes a little wide, and I said calmly, evenly like the words had been waiting, "Hope you're big." Introduction goes perfectly. Then I hung up. That night I slept soundly, no tossing, no racing. Thoughts, no jolting awake in the dark with old questions echoing in my head. For the first time in years, I felt light, not out of satisfaction, but because finally they knew who I was. The following day, before sunlight had entirely slipped through the thin curtains, I reached for my phone and checked my emails. Like always, a few meeting reminders, a couple of notes from accounting. Then I saw a name I didn't recognize in the from field. Hudson Kane. I opened the email. The first line hit me right away. "I'm sorry, I didn't know you were Melissa's brother. I've always respected you at the company." I raised an eyebrow, leaned against the pillow, and kept reading. Hudson wrote that he had been genuinely surprised to learn about the family connection between me and Melissa, and then without sidestepping or softening it, he said, "I didn't expect her to be like that. I'll be ending this relationship. Thank you for not putting me on the spot before everyone." I rested the phone on my chest and closed my eyes momentarily. It took me a few minutes before I reopened the inbox and started. I was just finishing up a meeting with the department heads and gathering my notes when my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw the name Melissa, which is my sister. I stared at it for a few seconds before hitting decline, not because I was angry or trying to make a point, but because I'd grown tired of apologies that only ever show up after everything has already fallen apart. "I'm sorry, I'm 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 sorry. I don't expect anyone to make decisions to stay in my good graces. I don't expect anyone to make decisions to stay in my good graces. I don't expect anyone to make decisions to stay in my good graces. Think carefully before you do anything. I don't expect anyone else to make decisions in order to stay in my good graces. I don't bring family into the workplace. I don't bring family into the workplace. I don't bring family into the workplace. I don't need anything else." He left because of how you live, how you treat people, how you look down on what you don't understand, and how you always assume that with a soft enough voice you can steer anyone. I reread the message and then I typed my response, which was not too long, not too short, just enough for her to understand. Hudson didn't leave because I told him to. He left because of how you live, how you treat people, how you look down on what you don't understand, and how you always assume that with a soft enough voice, you can steer anyone. I hit send, slipped the phone back into my pocket, and returned to my desk. However, less than a minute later, another message came through. I knew I had made a mistake this time. "Mean it, I'll change, please believe me, just this once." I didn't respond. I read it, sat with it for a moment, but nothing stirred inside me, not because I didn't care, but because I finally understood sometimes the distance between two people, it isn't in the apology, it's in when the apology comes. I quietly deleted the message, left nothing behind, and turned back to the life that was still actually happening. A week later on a Friday afternoon, just as I stepped back into the house from the garage, I froze. Right there on the porch my parents were. Standing at the front door, each holding a small suitcase, faces drawn with fatigue from a long flight. I didn't ask why they were here, because if they had flown all the way out to see me, it wasn't just a casual visit. I opened the door and let them in, no tension, no forced politeness, just a simple decision. I didn't want to have that conversation outside with the wind picking up along the porch. We sat in the living room. The tea on the table was still steaming. My father spoke first. He apologized with a tone calmer than usual. My mother added to it, said that they had thought things over, perhaps they had gone too far, and that things should have never gotten to this point. I remained silent, didn't interrupt, and just listened to see if this apology was indeed the end of something or just the beginning of something else. As I had anticipated, my father's tone changed, saying, "We're family, Nolan, and family helps each other. We raised you, sent you to school, and everything you have now is at least partially due to us." I looked at him, and my expression did not change, but my posture straightened just slightly, and then I Mother spoke, her voice soft. It's like she was saying something completely reasonable. If you could maybe send us about $2,000 a month, just a little support. It's not much for someone like you. I looked at the two people sitting in my living room, the same people who had once pushed me out of a family gathering because they believed I was an embarrassment, and now here they were sitting in my home attaching a price tag to their apology, a concrete price. $2,000 a month because I was their son, and to them my success wasn't mine, it was a debt I owed them. After their request, I let out a laugh that was not loud, not sarcastic, but just a soft chuckle, the kind you make when someone tells you a story that doesn't make sense. I looked at my parents, their eyes were fixed on me, waiting. I'm almost sure I would nod in agreement, but I wasn't angry. I had come too far to be rattled by things like this. I leaned back into the chair, voice steady and clear. What about Melissa? How much will she be contributing each month? The room seemed to pause. At that, what about Melissa? How much will she be contributing each month? The air thickened. My father glanced at my mother. She responded slowly, voice dropping just slightly. Your sister's job, it's still unstable, and the breakup with Hudson has taken a toll on her. I nodded gently, not surprised. The same old reasons wrapped in words that sounded empathetic, but they were just deflections. I lifted my gaze, looked directly at them, and replied, if she agrees to support you with $2,000 a month, I'll do the same, no more, no less. They didn't say a word, just stared at me as if trying to figure out whether I was serious. I continued calmly, or if you want me to carry the full amount, I'll need something in writing, a legal agreement confirming that after you both pass the house will belong to me in full. I sat still after that, no pressure, no further explanation, just waiting to see how they'd respond now that for the first time My father shot to his feet. He slammed his palm down on the wooden table, causing the teacup to tip over, its contents spilt down the edge. His voice roared through the room, chest rising and falling with fury. You're setting conditions for your parents. We raised you for over 20 years, and now you want to nickel and dime us like this? What kind of life are you living? He was shouting so loud I wouldn't be surprised if the neighbors next door heard every word. I didn't move, didn't flinch. I just sat there, hands resting on the arm of the chair, eyes locked on his, not cold, but no longer soft. I waited for him to finish, then I stood up slowly. My voice came out low and calm, but clear enough to cut through the storm he just unleashed. I think you both should leave my house. It wasn't a threat, it wasn't said in anger, it was simply a request from someone who had reached the very end of what respect could offer. No one said another word, only the sound of luggage dragging across the hardwood floor and the door clicking shut behind them. Quieter than everything they had. It has been 2 years since the last time I saw them, right here in my own home. I did not block their numbers, I did not change my email address, and I did not completely cut them off. I simply stopped reaching out to them and waited. I waited to see if, when I was no longer the shadow of duty and obligation, they would still see me as a member of the family. In these 2 years, there has been no call, no message asking how I've been, no mention of birthdays, health, or even a simple "how are you doing?" I used to believe that maybe one day they would change, but I've come to realize that I didn't. To understand, not everyone changes, especially those who've never believed they were wrong to begin with. I still live here, still work, still carry on with life. The only difference is I no longer let myself become an emotional ATM, willing to give, willing to be hurt, all in the name of duty. And if there's one thing I've taken from all of this, it's this: family is not a place where people get to demand your kindness and call it love. Real family, it is where you're seen as a person regardless of what you have to offer, not as a wallet, not as a backup plan, not as the last resort when everything else falls apart. And before I close this chapter, want to ask you something. Was I wrong for choosing not to go back, for saying no to supporting my parents with $2,000 a month? Even though they're older now, even though they once raised me, I used to believe that family could heal everything. But after being treated like a stranger in my own home more times than I can count, I chose to stand up and step out of that cycle. Was I too cold, or maybe was I finally learning to love myself at the right time? Leave your thoughts down below. I sincerely want to hear from you, regardless of whether you agree with the story or see things differently. If the story meant something to you, don't forget to hit the subscribe button to show your support for the channel. There are still a lot of stories that are waiting to be told and waiting to be heard. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you for staying until the very end.